Hi, this is Lovisa Alsen from Awakening Feminine Leadership, Pleasure, Power, and Presence. I've been wanting to create a video to just introduce you to what Awakening Feminine Leadership is. So here we are. Yeah, when starting with pleasure, it's so easy when we talk about pleasure to diminish it. We can say, well, that's something we can do when everything else is settled, and then we can have a bit of dessert and or a piece of chocolate, or we can have a bit of sex, or it's all this about as something extra. And usually we also have some attachments to saying it's a bit maybe childish, and most of all, we deny how it actually shapes our lives, or even more, we are not aware of the impact it has. I think it's since I'm really interested in global politics, and I'm noticing the countries that are most, you can say, disconnected from eros, from the feminine, and from pleasure. Not only are they pretty horrible places for women to live in, but it's also horrible places for everyone to live in. We are essentially not connected with our life force, the everything that gives life meaning, that makes life beautiful. And so in trauma circles, especially from the somatic experiencing path, which I'm familiar with, there is this, the way they teach it is really looking at life force and pleasure as a river. So you can see when it's flowing, that's usually when life is good. Like we are kind of flowing, flirting, having that sense of openness and curiosity and flirtation, and my favorite, seduction. But it is a flow. And the more contracted we become, which might be from trauma, but just in regular, from any form of stress, which most of us are in most of the time, and considering what's happening in the world, we are much more impacted by the social relationship to fear versus pleasure. And it's very hard to feel pleasure when we are caught in a state of fear. And yet, as what they're teaching, that even though you are in a contraction, there are ways to coming home to your pleasure without the outer circumstances needing to change. So pleasure in this sense almost becomes some form of activism, because you're choosing life, you're turning towards, you're moving towards what you want. You can have and see all of the things you don't want, but usually it's much harder to focus on, well, what do I want? That it's like a workout. We need to focus, and there are ways of activating this focus. And it is a practice. So all of this is connected to life force. And that's also why I teach Pussy Power, or my preferred name is the Jewel for the women's genitalia, because a jewel is very precious. And quite frankly, without jewels, none of us would exist on this planet. So they're pretty darn important. And there is also this tremendous power that comes when we are focusing, or essentially letting our energy be more centered in our nether regions. And in you see it in the tantric tradition, you see it in Taoism, you see it in Sufism. There is this understanding, and in Japan you have Hara, which is essentially the same point. It's a belly as a power center, and I'll come back to the belly. But for women, and since this has not really been spoken about in the same way, women do really have their own, our own power center, which is our jewel. And this has nothing to do about how much sex you have or don't have, but it is whether it's alive. Is your jewel alive? Is she giving you information? Are you aware of that information? How is that connecting? How is the nervous system activated also in your jewel? How are the whole connection to your heart? All of this is what's being activated when we are fully owning our jewel force. And quite frankly, it's so much more fun. It's going from black and white, living a life in black and white, to living a life in color, no matter what the circumstances. So that's why pleasure is how we enter awakening feminine leadership. And again, we are opening up our power. The second is power now coming from our belly. So everything I work with is embodied, but it's not embodied as there are many levels of embodiment. We are looking at a really deep, essential level, which in a way is beyond the body too, but we can't get there without going through the body. So, and when we come to being in our belly center, that is the power center, as I just mentioned, in many traditions. And here for women, it's this about not imitating a masculine form of power, which and it is a kind of a fake masculine or unconscious masculine that we are imitating, because we believe it's something about, often we adding armor, we become tougher, we don't really feel our hearts when we are in this power. And I used to be an expert at this. If you had me in a negotiation, I wanted something, I would leave with that what I wanted, and I would not be nice about it. So it's just, we all can go into those places. But for women, especially if you are working in a very masculine environment, we have a tendency to imitate that, because there are very few role models for feminine power. And again, since feminine has been more associated with something nice and pretty and kind, we are losing out on this tremendous power women have. And of course, coming back to the jewel, every woman who has been pregnant and had a child knows about her power. But for some reason, that birthing power often is not spread through the rest of our lives. And when it's kind of we tap into something and then we completely forget about it. And here we are consciously practicing standing in our power, and in a way it's not even standing, because we don't need to be standing. We can be my favorite is talking about like being a Black Panther. They can be lying around, they can move very slowly in a room, and yet you feel its power, it's emanating, that power. It's like, okay, you don't fuck around with that, but it's not because there is a defensive strategy or anything. It's just, all right, here are you, here am I, and let's see what's here. Let's see what wants to unfold. So that is the power that we are practicing in feminine leadership. And the last one, presence, is increasingly, as I'm teaching this, and because it's we can talk about different states of mindfulness and what we are connected with, and we can talk about non-duality and being part of a whole. The presence that I'm talking about is it's a being state. So we are, and that's a essence of awakening feminine leadership. It's moving into a being state and coming from that as in whether we are leading ourselves or someone else, we are coming from our depth, and our depth here meaning we are connected to something deeper and bigger than ourselves, and yet it is also an expression of our highest selves. And it does come with felt experience. So we are coming from a fullness, which we also practice space, like feeling more space. But coming from this fullness, which often in most wisdom traditions, that is not really practiced, and especially connecting the jewel and what I call the black jewel in the belly with the heart, and even our center in our head, the white jewel, as I call that. When all of these centers are connected, we are coming from a being place. And in that, there is a sense of fullness. We are, you can say, filled with what I also teach, some liquid golden honey that also has some glitter in it. So that is what presence, the way I teach it, and the way also, well, I've modified it a bit from what I've been taught. But there, for example, you can see when you practice for a while, you can even notice that even your lips become filled with this liquid golden honey. And it's a very pleasurable state to be in. And yet it's an absolute non-doing state. And when we are combining all of these, and as there is this, what we also do with other women, when we really turn on and have that glitter, have that light, and seduction of this, of being seduced by life as we are seducing it right back. That's the state of consciousness we are moving into. So that's really what awakening feminine leadership is. So if this resonates and if you feel called, please reach out, and I would love to meet you and see how we can seduce the world together, because it really needs it. Ciao.